Hey, welcome to Office Hours. I'm glad you stopped in. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about lessons learned from OpenAI projects and how you set yourself up to be successful in those engagements. So, it's been very interesting doing OpenAI projects because a lot of things that have made them successful have been the things that have made other AI projects successful over the last many years. We hired our first data scientist like 7 years ago. It's kind of like hiring the data scientists before it was cool to have data scientists. And over time, we found that there's been certain elements that have made those projects work. And it's been even more so as OpenAI has come into the front and started to accelerate every business wanting to leverage OpenAI to transform their organization. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So if I had to just package that up into maybe three big things that make those projects successful, I'd say the number one thing is having access to the data. So a lot of organizations, they go down the road, they get started with an AI project that has some transformative value to it. It could drive revenue, it could create operational savings, maybe even has a sponsor. But one of the things they find out is that they just haven't had enough history of this happening in the past, valuable data that informs the process to be able to get value quick enough for it to get traction. So like if you're building a OpenAI experience that surfaces documents for you to be able to understand the specs for a particular type of machine. If those documents don't exist, you're much better off starting with somewhere where the documents exist. It may be a sort of an obvious statement, but truly this is something that we really want people to think about is, do you have the documents? Do you have the data? Do you have an asset that allows you to hit the ground running? Do you have transcriptions that you can pull if you're doing voice to text and you're trying to analyze call logs? Do you have machine data about your manufacturing environment if you're trying to do predictive intelligence? Do you have old case data that you can use to be able to inform a chatbot that's used for customer support? If you have that data, you're starting to set yourself up for success. But if you don't, it really puts you in a position where you should have picked another use case. Because then what you're doing is you're spending all your time just trying to get the data, and rather than trying to spend your time using it to be able to accomplish an end goal. So as you're doing that evaluation for your project, really start with that initial question, do I have data? Second question is there a clear business value of solving this problem? So give you an example. I'm working with a company where they have a process where they have to match a PO with a customer invoice with a packaging slip and so on and so forth. They pack these things together. And if they match, then they're great, they're in good shape. But if they don't match, there's a potential that they produce the wrong product for the customer at extreme expense to the organization and producing an unhappy customer. And that has to be reviewed every single day. They do that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of times a year. So great use case, right? Because there's a lot of business value attached to it. It impacts the customer and it happens a lot. The flip side of this is a use case where it doesn't happen enough in order for you to invest to be able to solve it. Kind of another example is like, I have a customer that has maybe a process that runs only 900 times a year, but that process is super valuable. So the impact of that one process failing, even if it's only done 900 times a year, it gets them to a point where, yeah, I've increased the rate of success with my customer, and the risk of failure there is so high that it makes sense for us to do. But a lot of times people look at these use cases where it's like, it's either not done very often, or the cost of it isn't really aligned to the value that the customer is going to be getting from. And they're better off picking a use case where it happens a lot, it has a substantial impact on the end user and the end customer, whether it's your customer's customer, or it's your customer, or it's an internal business user, or it's a scenario where it's complex enough that addressing the problem early on solves a bunch of downstream things that happen later in the process. So very, very important that you pick something that has that either drives new revenue and drives it to a substantial degree as a subset of following the path. Like sometimes the first project doesn't drive that original, that value that you're trying to hit, but it sets up for driving the value. Like a lot of times companies start with pilots. Why? Because they want to prove that it actually can do what they expect it to do in a micro use case. But as they go down the path, they know that this is the end game they're chasing, and this is how they've sold it to the organization. But frankly, if it doesn't have a strong enough business case, especially common So a lot of organizations start to look to like IT use cases, and the balance between value in the IT use case versus the business use case just isn't there. Go for the business use case every single time. It's driving direct revenue and operational savings to the broader business. You're creating a bigger impact. You're driving something that's really substantial versus the IT impact, which can be significant, but is oftentimes the wrong place to start because your tent is just inside of IT. You're not getting the right group of people on the bus. So third item is an engaged sponsor. You might have both of those original things. You might have the data, you might have the business value, but if you don't have an engaged sponsor that's willing to support you in rolling this out in the business, you're going to be in for a real challenge. So for example, we had a project that we did that had a custom model that was built, and it had hundreds of sales reps that were using this platform. Well, one of the things that made it successful is we knew that was going to take a while to roll out. We were changing the way people's process worked. We were changing the way that they quoted customers, essentially. And those sales reps had to get accustomed to using a new tool and changing their business process that would drop their time to deliver value to their customers. But they had to roll it out location by location, give them the necessary training, make sure that they were successfully using it, and then track them. And if we didn't have an engaged sponsor, especially the engaged sponsor that was the leader in the business, in this case, the VP of sales, we wouldn't have been successful because we wouldn't have gotten that support necessary to roll it out through all these business users, and we would have been stuck in like an IT scenario. So really, really important that the people supporting you are the direct people in the business that sponsor that work and are accountable for that outcome. So they're going for the same goal. They're working toward that same business efficiency. Partner that with a leader in IT that is desiring to see that transformation occur and is open to working with the business to achieve it, and is really open about the idea this is intended to drive new revenue and focus on driving new revenue using the technology, and be willing to put additional effort into the platform to keep iterating on it to ensure that it actually gets to where the promise is, because we know ultimately that if we keep doing so, we're going to get to the revenue side that we were promising. So really, really, really important that you have that sponsor that's pairing with it. So one other thing that I thought I'd mention is there's been a lot of common traits amongst the leaders that have been successful in this space and the leaders that have not. The leaders that have been successful in this particular space have been the ones who are leading from a business first perspective. They're not the IT leaders who are like caring so much about like PCs and devices and things of that nature. It's important, but their goal is to kind of commoditize that and push it to the side. The most successful organizational leaders that are engaged in these AI projects, they're ones that understand the business, they're willing to innovate, and they're willing to put their name out there to support the initiative, even though it might not be the most easy thing for them to support over time. Now is a good time, right? Like every board is asking the CIO, what am I doing about AI? How am I integrating this in my projects? But you still need a leader that's willing to make a choice between the binary of like, I'm just gonna wait and see, we're gonna find out what happens, hopefully it gets there, and the inspirational, bold leader that says, we're gonna change our business leveraging this, and I'm gonna invest in it, and I'm gonna support it across the organization. We're gonna pick a use case, we're gonna make that use case worthwhile within our organization, and then we're gonna chase more. They're setting the tone that drives that value across the organization. So in addition to those top three main things you need, which are access to the data, clear business value, and a sponsor, you also need to have a leader which is future-facing, engaged, and cares about this type of initiative. They're willing to experiment, and to a certain extent, some of the interesting use cases that we've had are scale focused. They're not just like, this is my only use case. I'm doing this project to learn, to know how I will scale it across multiple use cases within my organization. So they're very focused on this idea of creating value across more than one use case, and they're using this as an opportunity to be able to set up the future downstream opportunities later on. So when you look to do this in your organization, avoid the missteps of not having data, not having good business value, not having a sponsor, and not having a leader that's truly driving demonstrative change within their organization, flip it around, have those things, and create an opportunity within your organization. In many cases, be the leader that's actually driving it. Be the leader that is making your business have the courage to be able to create business value using this technology.